The stars had never looked so cold to Commander Daniel Harper as they did on that terrible night. He stood on the bridge of the starship Relentless, his hands gripping the railing so hard that his knuckles had turned white. Around him, warning lights flashed red and orange, and the sounds of alarms mixed with the desperate voices of his crew. The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 17 star systems. They had built colonies on distant worlds, created great cities on moons and planets that their ancestors could only dream about. The United Earth Coalition had assembled a fleet of 200 warships to protect these colonies, and everyone had believed they were safe. They were wrong. The Vexery had appeared without warning. Their fleet numbered in the thousands, each ship made of some strange crystalline material that seemed to glow with inner light. They moved through space like shards of ice, beautiful and deadly. When Daniel first saw them on his tactical display, he felt his heart sink into his stomach. "Commander, we are receiving transmissions from the flagship," said Lieutenant Katie Morgan, his second-in-command. She was young, only 28 years old, but she had proven herself to be brave and clever in the years they had served together. "Put it through," Daniel said, though he already knew what it would say. The voice that came through the speakers was cold and strange. Translated by the ship's computer into flat, emotionless English, "Humans of Earth, you have entered space that belongs to the Vexery Dominion. You will surrender your ships and your worlds, or you will be destroyed. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact." Admiral Patricia Cole, commanding from the flagship Horizon, sent back humanity's response. "This is Admiral Cole of the United Earth Coalition. We have no quarrel with you. We ask only to live in peace." The Vexery answer came in the form of weapons fire. The battle that followed was not really a battle at all. It was a massacre. The Vexery ships moved faster than anything human engineers had ever built. Their weapons cut through human shields like they were made of paper. Their own defenses seemed to absorb. Human weapons fire without any effect. Daniel watched as ships he had known for years exploded into clouds of fire and debris. The Defender, commanded by his old friend Captain Marcus Lane, was torn apart in seconds. The Starlight, the Unity, the Braveheart, all of them gone in flashes of light. "Evasive maneuvers," Daniel ordered, his voice somehow staying steady even as his world fell apart. "Target their engine sections. Maybe we can find a weak point." Katie worked her console with desperate speed. "Firing now, Commander." The missiles from the Relentless streaked toward the nearest Vexery ship. They hit their target, and for one brief moment, Daniel felt hope rise in his chest. Then the smoke cleared, and he saw that the Vexery ship was completely undamaged. "No effect," Katie said, her voice hollow. The battle lasted 6 hours. When the retreat was finally called, humanity had lost 173 ships. The Vexery had lost 12. Daniel's ship was among the survivors, but only barely. Half of his crew was dead. The engines were failing. The hull had been breached in 3 places. As the survivors limped away from the battlefield, the Vexery broadcast one final message. "Humans of Earth, your resistance has ended. Your colonies will fall. Your species will serve the Vexery Dominion or be exterminated. This is the natural order. The strong rule. The weak submit. We are strong. You are weak. Accept this truth." Katie pulled herself up from a damaged console. Blood ran down her forehead from a wound she had not even noticed receiving, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Commander, what do we do now?" "They're going to take Earth. They're going to take everything."
Oh.
Daniel did not answer immediately. He stared at the screen, watching the Vexery fleet move toward the inner planets like a slow wave of death. His mind was filled with images of his home, of his mother in her garden on Mars, of his sister and her children on Earth. All of them were now in the path of an enemy that could not be stopped. But even in his despair, something stirred in the back of his mind. It was a memory from his childhood, sitting on his grandfather's knee and listening to stories about old Earth and its endless wars. His grandfather had been a Marine, a warrior from a long line of warriors, and he used to tell Daniel about the things that made humans different from other creatures. Humans are not the strongest, his grandfather had said. We are not the fastest. We do not have claws or fangs. But we have something else. We have stubbornness. We have anger. We have the ability to take a loss and turn it into fuel for victory. Daniel remembered laughing at these words when he was young. They had seemed like the ramblings of an old man who had watched too many war movies. But now, standing on the bridge of his broken ship, watching his species face extinction, those words felt different. They felt like a promise, sir. Katie said again. What are your orders? Daniel took a deep breath. He turned away from the screen and looked at his surviving crew. They were wounded, exhausted, and terrified. They had just witnessed the worst defeat in human history. By all rights, they should have been broken. But as Daniel looked at their faces, he did not see defeat. He saw anger. He saw determination. He saw the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and world wars. We fall back, Daniel said, his voice growing stronger with each word. We regroup. We find the other survivors. And then we teach these Vexari something they should have learned before they picked this fight. Katie frowned, confusion mixing with the hope that was starting to grow in her eyes. What's that, Commander? Daniel allowed himself a small smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a wolf might give before the hunt. Rule number 1, he said. Never back a human into a corner. Never take away all their options. Never make them feel like they have nothing left to lose. Because when you do that, when you push us to the edge, something happens. We stop being afraid. We stop being reasonable. And we become the most dangerous thing in the universe. He turned back to the screen, watching the distant light of the Vexari fleet. They think they've won, Daniel said quietly. They think it's over. But it's not over. It won't be over until one of us is gone from this universe. And I don't plan on it being us. The Relentless limped away into the darkness of space, carrying its wounded crew toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the Vexari celebrated their victory. Confident that the war was already finished, they had no idea that it had only just begun. 3 months had passed since the day that humans would forever call the fall. In that time, the Vexari had conquered Earth, Mars, Venus, and for other major colony worlds, billions of people had died. Billions more had been captured and forced into slavery. The great cities that humanity had built over centuries were now either rubble or prison. Camps. But not everyone had fallen. Deep in the outer reaches of the solar system, on a frozen moon called Callisto, the survivors gathered. They came in damaged ships and stolen transports, carrying whatever they could save from the conquered worlds. They were soldiers and scientists, farmers and factory workers, teachers and children. They were what remained of humanity's hope. Admiral Patricia Cole stood at the front of a converted mining chamber, looking out at the faces of her people. She was 63 years old, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much pain in recent months. Her husband and 2 sons had died in the fall, killed when the Vexari bombarded their home city on Earth. She had not cried when she learned the news. She had simply felt something inside her change, something that turned grief into cold, patient purpose. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "I know many of you have lost everything. I know many of you are tired and scared. I know some of you are wondering if there is any point in continuing to fight." She paused, letting her words settle. "I'm here to tell you that there is a point. And I am here to tell you how we are going to make the Vexari regret the day they ever heard of humanity." Commander Daniel Harper sat in the front row, his arm still wrapped in a healing sleeve from injuries he had received in the battle. Beside him sat Captain Samuel Wright, a former cargo ship pilot who had turned his vessel into a weapon of war. Samuel was a big man with rough hands and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone, but his eyes were clever and quick. "The Vexari believe we are broken," Patricia continued. "They have stopped hunting us. They think we are hiding in the outer reaches like wounded animals, waiting to die. They think we are not worth the fuel it would cost to find us." She smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "That is their first mistake. Their second mistake was assuming that because they destroyed our fleet, they destroyed our will to fight. Their third mistake was leaving us alive to learn from our defeat." She touched a control, and a holographic display came to life behind her. It showed images of Vexery ships, Vexery weapons, and detailed analysis of their technology. Dr. Lisa Park and her team have been studying everything we could capture or record from the battle, Patricia said. The news is not good. The Vexery are more advanced than us in every way that matters in a straight fight. Their ships are faster. Their weapons are stronger. Their shields are more powerful. If we try to fight them the way we fought before, we will lose. Again and again until there are none of us left. So what do we do? He asked, his voice rough. Just give up? Patricia shook her head. No. We stop fighting straight. She changed the display. Now it showed images from human history. Ancient warriors hiding in jungles. Resistance fighters in occupied cities. Soldiers using tricks and traps instead of direct force. The Vexery have conquered 47 species across 3 galaxies, Patricia said. Every single one of those species tried to fight them the same way. They built bigger fleets. They developed better weapons. They met the Vexery in open battle. Every single one of them lost. She turned to face her audience directly. But humans are different. We have spent thousands of years fighting each other. We have developed methods of warfare that would never occur to a species that has always been the strongest. We know how to fight when we are outnumbered. We know how to fight when we are outgunned. We know how to make every death cost the enemy more than they can afford to pay. Daniel leaned forward, feeling something stir in his chest. It was hope, fragile and uncertain, but real. What exactly are you proposing, Admiral? He asked. Patricia's eyes gleamed. I am proposing that we stop trying to beat the Vexery and start trying to bleed them. We will not destroy their fleets. We will destroy their supply lines. We will not conquer their bases. We will sabotage them from within. We will not fight their soldiers in open battle. We will kill them in their sleep. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some of the listeners looked uncomfortable. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked eager. This is not the honorable warfare our ancestors imagined when they dreamed of exploring the stars, Patricia admitted. This is dirty. This is ugly. This is the kind of fighting that happens when one side has nothing left to lose. But it is also the kind of fighting that works. She gestured to Dr. Lisa Park, a small woman with tired eyes and clever hands who stood near the edge of the stage. Alicia has developed something special, Patricia said. A computer virus designed to infiltrate Vexery systems. It will not do anything obvious. It will not trigger their alarms. It will simply watch and learn and report back to us. Within months, we will know more about their fleet movements than their own commanders do. Lisa stepped forward, her voice soft but confident. We are also working on weapons. Not bigger weapons, but smarter ones. Bombs that can be hidden in cargo containers. Poisons that can be introduced into their food supplies. Devices that can disable their engines from the inside. Patricia nodded. We are going to become their nightmare. Every time they think they are safe, we will be there. Every time they relax their guard, we will strike. We will make them afraid to sleep, afraid to eat, afraid to trust anything or anyone. She looked around the chamber one final time. The Vexery think they have one. They think humanity is finished. But they do not understand what they have created. They have taken away our homes, our families, our future. They have left us with nothing except our anger and our determination. Her voice rose, filling the chamber. And that makes us more dangerous than any fleet they could ever face. Because a human with nothing to lose is a human who will do anything, sacrifice anything, endure anything to achieve victory. They wanted to conquer us. Instead, they have awakened something that will never stop, never rest, and never forgive. She raised her hand in a fist. Today, we begin our revenge. Today, the Vexery learn what it means to make an enemy of humanity. Today, we teach them rule number 1. The chamber erupted in cheers. And somewhere in the cold depths of space, on worlds they believed were completely under their control, the Vexery went about their business. They had no idea that the storm was coming. The first attack came 8 months after humanity's defeat. and it came from a direction the Vexery never expected. A supply convoy was traveling through space between Earth and Mars. It carried food, weapons, and building materials for the Vexery occupation forces. 12 transport ships moved in formation, protected by 4 warships that scanned the darkness for any sign of threat. They found nothing. Their sensors showed only empty space, cold and silent. The convoy commander, a Vexery officer named Kethsel, allowed himself to feel satisfied. The humans were gone, scattered to the outer reaches of their system like frightened animals. They posed no danger. Then the cargo containers began to open. Captain Samuel Wright led the assault team personally. He had spent 6 weeks sealed inside a metal box that measured 3 meters by 2 meters, breathing recycled air, eating paste from tubes, and waiting for this moment. 57 other humans had done the same. Packed into containers that had been loaded onto Vexery ships from a captured human station, the Vexery had never thought to look inside. Samuel floated through the opening of his container. His body, covered in a modified mining suit, fitted with stolen Vexery weapons. Around him, his team emerged like ghosts, silent and deadly. They had trained for months for this moment, learning to move in zero gravity, learning to kill quickly and quietly. Team Alpha, target the bridge, Samuel whispered into his communication device. Team Beta, take out their engines. Team Gamma, secure the cargo bay. No alarms. No survivors. They moved through the ship like shadows. The Vexery were bigger than humans, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and skin that looked like blue crystal. But size did not matter when you did not know the enemy was there, till a blade found your throat. Samuel reached the bridge in 12 minutes. 2 guards stood outside the door, their attention focused on the corridor ahead. They never saw the humans who dropped from the ceiling behind them. The bridge crew died next, cut down before they could send a distress signal. Samuel stood over the body of the convoy commander and allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Transport 1 secured, he reported. Move to the next ship. By the time the Vexery warships realized something was wrong, 4 of the 12 transport vessels had gone silent. The warship commanders ordered their crews to battle stations, but they did not know where to aim their weapons. The enemy was already inside their own ships. One by one, the transports went dark. The warships, designed to fight enemies in open space, found themselves helpless against attackers they could not see or target. When one warship tried to destroy a captured transport, Samuel's team had already moved to their vessel. Using Vexery escape pods to cross the gap between ships, the battle, if it could be called that, lasted for hours. By the end, every Vexery in the convoy was dead, and humanity had captured enough supplies to support their hidden colonies for a year. News of the attack spread through Vexery command like fire through dry grass. High Commander Zethrel, the officer who had led the conquest of Earth, received the report with a mixture of confusion and anger. How is this possible? He demanded. The humans are defeated. They have no ships capable of reaching our convoys. His subordinates had no answer. But the convoy attack was only the beginning. On occupied Earth, a different kind of warfare was being born. In the ruins of cities, in the camps where human prisoners were held, in the factories where humans were forced to work, resistance cells began to form. They were led by ordinary people. Teachers who had lost their schools, farmers who had lost their land, mothers who had lost their children. They had no military training, no weapons, no hope of victory in any traditional sense. But they had something that the Vexery did not understand. They had rage. The first act of resistance was small. A power generator in a Vexery base suffered a mysterious failure. The Vexery engineers who came to repair it found nothing wrong with the machinery. They did not notice the tiny device that had been hidden inside. A device built from stolen parts by a woman named Hannah Carter, who had been an electronics engineer before the war. The second act was larger. A Vexery officer was found dead in his quarters, his throat cut with a kitchen knife. The human who killed him was never identified. And the Vexery guards who investigated found nothing but frightened, silent prisoners who claimed to know nothing. The third act was larger still. An entire garrison went silent one night, All 40 Vexery soldiers killed in their sleep. When reinforcements arrived, they found the walls marked with a single word. Painted in blood. Remember, Dr. Lisa Park's virus was spreading through Vexery computer systems like a disease that showed no symptoms. It copied itself from ship to ship, from base to base, from world to world. It did nothing to attract attention. It simply watched and learned and sent information back to the hidden human colonies. Within 6 months, Admiral Patricia Cole knew when every Vexari patrol would pass through every sector of human space. She knew which bases were well defended and which were vulnerable. She knew which officers were cruel and which were merely doing their duty. She knew everything, and the Vexery knew nothing. The attacks increased. Supply convoys vanished. Officers were assassinated. Bases suffered mysterious accidents. Weapons disappeared from armories. Ships developed engine failures at critical moments. High Commander Zethril ordered increased patrols and harsher punishment for any humans suspected of resistance. He executed prisoners publicly, hoping to frighten the population into submission. The attacks increased further. For every cell that the Vexery destroyed, 2 more appeared. For every human they killed, 10 more joined the resistance. The fear that Zethril tried to create turned into fuel for human anger, and that anger burned hotter with every passing day. 1 year after the fall, Zethril stood in his command center on the orbital platform above Earth, studying reports that made no sense. He had conquered dozens of worlds in his career. He had broken species that were older and more advanced than humanity. He had never failed, but these humans refused to behave like any enemy he had ever faced. They did not surrender when they were beaten. They did not flee when they were outnumbered. They did not accept their defeat even when it was obvious to everyone that they had lost. They are like animals, one of his officers said. They do not understand that they cannot win. Zethril shook his head slowly. No, he said. They understand perfectly. They simply do not care. They would rather fight and die than submit and live. He stared at the blue and green world floating below him, the world that should have been easy to control. I am beginning to think, he said quietly, that we have made a terrible mistake. He was right. But it was already too late to fix it. 2 years after the invasion, the Vexery Dominion controlled human space in name only. On paper, they had one. Their flags flew over human cities. Their soldiers patrolled human streets. Their ships orbited human worlds. But the truth was very different from what the records showed. Their supply lines were under constant attack. Convoys that should have taken days to travel between worlds now took weeks. Forced to take long detours to avoid ambush points that seemed to change every time they were mapped. For every 10 ships that left port, only 7 arrived at their destination. Their officers lived in fear. They traveled in groups, slept in fortified rooms, and trusted no one. Assassination had become so common that serving on a human world was considered a punishment rather than a duty. Young Vexery soldiers requested transfers to active war zones against other species, where at least the enemy fought in ways that made sense. Their soldiers, once confident in their superiority, had become nervous and exhausted. They jumped at shadows. They fired at sounds in the night. They looked at every human face and wondered if this was the one who would kill them. Admiral Patricia Cole stood on the bridge of the Defiance. Humanity's new flagship? It had been built in secret over 18 months, assembled in an asteroid field from salvaged parts and stolen technology. It was not a beautiful ship. Its hull was a patchwork of different metals. Its engines were mismatched. Its weapons had been designed by people who learned engineering from necessity rather than training, but it worked. And it carried weapons that the Vexery had never seen before. The target is their regional command station, Patricia said, addressing her senior officers in the briefing room. A holographic display showed the massive orbital platform that hung above Earth. Bristling with weapons and surrounded by a fleet of 30 warships, intelligence indicates that High Commander Zethril himself is present. Commander Daniel Harper, now gray at the temples after 2 years of constant fighting, studied the display with experienced eyes. That's a lot of firepower protecting him. A direct assault would cost us most of our fleet. Captain Katie Morgan, scarred and hardened from her own years of war, nodded in agreement. We don't have the ships to fight them head-on. We never did. That's not going to change. Patricia smiled. It was the same cold smile she had worn since the day she learned her family was dead. We're not going to fight head-in. We're going to do what we've been doing for 2 years. We're going to cheat. The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. A captured Vexery transport, its crew replaced by humans wearing stolen armor, would approach the station claiming to have suffered damage from a resistance attack. While the station's attention was focused on this decoy, a team of infiltrators would board through a maintenance shaft that Lisa Park's virus had quietly unlocked. The transport would be piloted by Lieutenant Christopher Kane, a young man who had lost his parents, his sister, and everyone he had ever loved in the fall. He had volunteered for the mission knowing that his chances of survival were very small. I have nothing left, he had told Patricia when he asked for the assignment. Let me use what time I have left to mean something. Patricia had looked at him for a long moment before nodding. Make it count, she said. The operation began at 0300 hours station time. Christopher guided the damaged transport toward the station's docking port, transmitting a distress signal that was mostly true. The ship had been attacked. There were wounded aboard. They needed assistance. The Vexery, who had grown tired of human tricks but could not ignore a damaged Dominion vessel, opened the docking port. Christopher brought the transport in smoothly, his hands steady on the controls despite the fear that filled his chest. The moment the docking clamps engaged, everything happened at once. Samuel Wright led the assault team through the airlock. 50 humans in stolen armor moving with the speed and precision of long practice. They had studied the station's layout for months, memorizing every corridor, every junction, every possible point of resistance. The Vexery guards at the docking port died before they could raise an alarm. The team split into 3 groups, each with a specific target. Samuel took the largest group toward the command center. A second team headed for the reactor core. A third moved to disable the communication array. Meanwhile, Christopher Kane sealed the transport's airlock and began the next phase of his mission. He guided the ship away from the dock, ignoring the confused signals from station control, and aimed directly for the nearest Vexery warship. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a small sun. The warship's shields, designed to stop weapons fire from outside, could not handle a collision from a vessel that was already inside their defensive perimeter. The explosion tore through 3 decks, killing hundreds and throwing the entire Vexery fleet into confusion. At that moment, the human fleet emerged from behind a nearby moon, where they had been hiding with their engines cold and their systems silent. 50 ships, everything humanity had managed to build or capture in 2 years of war, surged forward. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Vexery had experienced. The human ships did not fight in formation. They did not follow predictable patterns. They attacked in groups of 3 or 4, striking vulnerable points and then retreating before the Vexery could respond. Inside the station, Samuel's team reached the command center. The Vexery guards fought hard, but they were confused and unprepared. The humans had spent years learning to fight in close quarters, in darkness, against enemies larger and stronger than themselves. They knew exactly where to strike, exactly how to move, exactly when to press forward and when to fall back. High Commander Zethral was captured in his own command chair. A human blade at his throat before he could reach his weapon. Do not move, Samuel said, his voice cold. You are now a prisoner of the human resistance. The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, the station was in human hands. 12 Vexery warships had been destroyed, and the rest had fled. It was the first major victory humanity had won since the war began. Zethro was brought before Admiral Patricia Cole on the bridge of the Defiance. He was bound and surrounded by guards, but he held himself with the dignity of a being who had never known defeat before this day. This changes nothing, he said, his translator making his words sound flat and mechanical. The Dominion will send more fleets, more soldiers. You cannot win. Patricia regarded him with eyes that held no mercy. You're right, she said. We probably can't win. Not in the way you understand winning. We don't have enough ships to defeat your dominion. We don't have enough soldiers to conquer your worlds. We don't have enough resources to match you in a long war. She stepped closer, and Zethril saw something in her face that made him uncomfortable for reasons he could not name. But here's what you failed to understand, Patricia said. We don't need to defeat you. We just need to make conquering us so expensive that it's not worth the cost. Every ship you send here is a ship not fighting somewhere else. Every soldier you lose to us is a soldier who can't control your other conquests. Every year you spend trying to break us is a year your other enemies can use to grow stronger. She leaned closer still. You wanted to conquer us quickly and move on. Instead, you're stuck here, bleeding resources into a war that will never end. And do you know why it will never end? Because humans don't surrender. We don't give up. We don't accept defeat, no matter how obvious it seems. Zethril stared at her. You would condemn your species to eternal war rather than accept peace through submission? Patricia's smile was terrible. Yes, because that's what humans do. We survived ice ages. We survived plagues. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times. But we're still here. And we'll still be here long after your dominion has crumbled to dust. She turned away. Take him to the cells. We have a war to fight. The war continued for another 10 years. It was not a glorious war of great battles and heroic victories. There were no monuments built to celebrate turning points because there were no turning points. There was only the slow, grinding, relentless pressure of a species that refused to die. The Vexery Dominion sent 3 more invasion fleets to human space. The first arrived 2 years after the fall of HFY Orbital Station, carrying enough soldiers to occupy every human world 10 times over. It never reached its destination. Human raiders attacked its supply ships, destroyed its fuel depots, and sabotaged its engines. By the time the fleet limped home, it had lost half its vessels without fighting a single major battle. The second fleet came 4 years later, moving carefully and protecting its supply lines with heavy escorts. It lasted longer, but the result was the same. Human attacks came from everywhere and nowhere, striking when least expected and vanishing before retaliation was possible. The fleet commander, a veteran of 100 campaigns, reported to the Dominion that fighting humans was like trying to fight smoke. The third fleet never came at all. The resources were needed elsewhere, because other species had begun to notice. The Vexery Dominion had ruled 3 galaxies for 10,000 years. They had conquered species beyond counting, broken civilizations that had lasted longer than human history. They had seemed invincible, eternal, as permanent as the stars themselves. But now there were cracks in that image. Stories spread from system to system, carried by traitors and prisoners and spies. Stories of a small species from an unimportant world that had refused to bow. Stories of convoys destroyed and officers killed. Stories of a war that the mighty Dominion could not win. Rebellions broke out on worlds that had been silent for centuries. Species that had accepted their fate began to wonder if perhaps fate could be changed. The Vexery found themselves fighting on a dozen fronts instead of one, and every front drained resources that could have been used to finally crush the stubborn humans. Admiral Patricia Cole did not live to see the end of the war. She died in the 7th year, peacefully in her sleep aboard the Defiance. She was 80 years old, and she had spent the last 17 years of her life fighting an enemy that most would have called unbeatable. Her last words were recorded and transmitted to every human ship in settlement. Make them regret it, she said. Make them wish they had never heard of us. Make them understand that some victories are too expensive to be worth winning. She was buried in space. Her body launched toward Earth's sun, where it would eventually be consumed by the fire that had given birth to humanity's world. Daniel Harper, now an admiral himself, spoke at her memorial. She gave us hope when we had none, he said. She showed us that defeat is only defeat if you accept it. She taught us that the most powerful weapon in the universe is not a ship or a bomb. It is the refusal to give up. He continued her work. The attacks continued. The resistance continued. The bleeding of the Vexery Dominion continued. Human technology advanced at a speed that shocked the Vexery, who had expected the primitives to stagnate without access to their conquered worlds. Instead, necessity drove innovation, and humans found solutions to problems that had stumped other species for millennia. They learned to build ships that could hide from sensors. They developed weapons that could pierce Vexery shields. They created communication systems that could not be intercepted or jammed. They also shared their knowledge. Resistance movements across Vexery space received human training, human technology, and human encouragement. The idea spread faster than any ship could travel. The Dominion can be hurt. The Dominion can be fought. The Dominion can be made to pay. In the 12th year of the war, a Vexery diplomatic vessel arrived at the edge of human space. It carried no weapons and flew with its shields down, the universal signal of peaceful intent. It carried an offer, not surrender. The Vexery would never use that word, but an end to hostilities, recognition of human sovereignty, withdrawal from human space, the return of conquered worlds and captured populations. The terms were negotiated over 6 months. Admiral Daniel Harper led the human delegation, his hair now completely white, his face lined with age and experience. Captain Katie Morgan stood at his side, along with Captain Samuel Wright, Dr. Lisa Park, and a dozen others who had survived the long war. The final treaty was signed on Earth. In the ruins of the United Nations building in New York City, humans had deliberately left the building unrepaired, a monument to what had been lost and what had been endured. The Vexery delegation was led by their new High Commander, a young officer who had risen to power after Zethrel's capture and the disasters that followed. He signed the treaty with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been fear. When the signing was complete, the High Commander looked at Daniel with his 4 eyes and asked a question that had been bothering him since he first studied humanity. "I must understand," he said, his translator giving his words a tone of genuine curiosity. "How did you do it?" "Your species was defeated. Completely. By every measure we use to judge these things, you should have surrendered. You should have accepted your place in the Dominion. Why did you not?" Daniel considered the question for a long moment. Around him stood the survivors of the Long War. Humans who had fought and bled and sacrificed everything except their determination. Katie, scarred and gray, but still sharp. Samuel, walking with a limp that would never heal. Lisa, whose clever mind had turned the Vexery's own technology against them and behind them. Watching through screens across 100 worlds were the billions of humans who had survived. The children born during the war who had never known peace. The elderly who remembered what life had been like before the Vexery came. The fighters and workers and dreamers who had refused to give up. "There is a rule," Daniel said finally. "An old rule from back when we only fought each other? Rule number 1. The High Commander leaned forward slightly, his interest clear even through his alien features. "Never corner something meaner than you," Daniel said. He paused, letting the words sink in. "Never take away all of someone's options. Never push them so hard that they have nothing left to lose." He looked around at the ruined building, at the overgrown streets visible through the shattered windows, at the world that had been conquered and was now being freed. "You conquered our planet," he continued. "You killed billions of our people. You destroyed everything we had built over thousands of years. You thought you had broken us. You thought we would accept defeat because we had no choice." Shook his head slowly. "But you didn't break us. You made us angry. And then you made the mistake of leaving us alive to do something about it." He extended his hand, a human gesture of agreement that the Vexery had learned to recognize. "We don't hold grudges forever," Daniel said as the High Commander hesitantly took his hand. "We can forgive. We can move forward, but we will never forget. And anyone who thinks about attacking us in the future should remember what happened here." The treaty was signed. The Vexery withdrew, and humanity began the long process of rebuilding, carrying with them the knowledge that the universe was dangerous and that survival was never guaranteed. But they also carried something else: pride in what they had accomplished, knowledge of what they were capable of when pushed to the edge, and a warning that they broadcast across the stars in 1,000 languages. We are human. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars and alien invasions. We do not surrender. We do not give up. We do not accept defeat, no matter how certain it seems. And if you threaten us, if you try to destroy us, if you push us into a corner with no way out, we will remind you of rule number 1. Never back a human into a corner. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but humanity was ready for whatever came next. They had proven that in the fires of war. They would prove it again and again for as long as the stars burned. Some lessons once learned are never forgotten.